In 2013, neighbors in West Virginia notified police after spotting children locked inside a shed, and what investigators uncovered was one of the most horrific adoption scandals in recent history. Jean K. Whitefeather and her husband Donald Lance had adopted 5 black siblings only to subject them to forced labor, confinement, and racial abuse, essentially treating them as slaves. The kids were forced to dig holes with their bare hands, hardly fed, pepper sprayed for disobedience, and locked away at night with no lights or toilets. When their oldest daughter testified, she told them, "I'll never understand how you can sleep at night. You are monsters." In March 2025, a judge sentenced both of them to more than 150 years behind bars, declaring, "You brought these children to West Virginia, a place I know as almost heaven, and you put them in hell. This court will now put you in yours." In the early 1930s, New York high society had an unlikely new it girl, a mannequin named Cynthia. Designed by artist Lester Gaba, she was so lifelike that designers dressed her in couture. She was photographed at parties and even received fan mail like a real celebrity. For years, people treated her like she was actually alive. But in 1938, Cynthia toppled from a chair and shattered into pieces, and newspapers reported her death with obituaries as though a beloved socialite had just passed away. In the early 1980s, Minneapolis was haunted by the weepy-voiced killer, a man who routinely phoned police after his murders, sobbing and begging them to stop him. For years, his trembling voice was the only lead. That changed in 1982 when he lured sex worker Denise Williams into his car and stabbed her 15 times with a screwdriver. But Williams fought back, smashing a glass bottle over his head and escaping. Bleeding and panicked, he later called 911 for medical help, and detectives immediately recognized the same weepy voice from the anonymous murder call. He was identified as Paul Michael Stefani and sentenced to life. He didn't want to die alone, so in 2003, 56-year-old Kim Dae-han did the unthinkable. After suffering a stroke and sinking into despair, he carried containers of flammable liquid onto a crowded South Korean subway train and lit them on fire. Within minutes, the underground station was an inferno, one train engulfed in flames, another trapped behind sealed doors as the smoke choked hundreds of passengers. By the time rescuers gained control, 192 passengers were dead, and hundreds more were injured in South Korea's worst disaster in peacetime history. Kim, badly burned but alive, ended up fleeing the scene, only to be captured, sentenced to life, and die alone in prison the following year. In 2010, 15-year-old Rebecca Aylward agreed to meet up with her ex-boyfriend Joshua Davies after he promised her they might get back together. What she didn't know was that Davies had been boasting for weeks about his plans to kill her, even joking with friends about what he'd receive if he followed through with it. One friend sarcastically told him he'd buy him a breakfast if he actually did it. Just before the murder, Davies allegedly texted that same friend, "Don't say anything, but you may just owe me a breakfast." On the day of their meeting, Davies lured Rebecca into the woods near Aberkenfig, South Wales, where he crushed her skull with a rock and left her body face down in the mud. Hours later, when Rebecca's mother was frantically searching for her, Davies calmly updated his Facebook status to "feeling chill." At trial, jurors heard about his chilling boasts and casual cruelty, and he was sentenced to life in prison. The friend who joked about the breakfast later admitted that he never thought Davies would actually go through with it. In November of 2021, 23-year-old Tina Tintor was driving home in Las Vegas after taking her golden retriever Max out for a late-night walk when her car was suddenly struck at more than 150 miles per hour by NFL wide receiver Henry Ruggs III, who was heavily intoxicated. The impact sent her Toyota RAV4 up in flames, trapping both Tina and Max inside as bystanders desperately tried but failed to pull them out. Both were killed in the blaze, and Ruggs, who had a BAC more than twice the legal limit, was later sentenced to prison for DUI resulting in death. In 1991, schizophrenic artist Brian Charnley began a project unlike any other. He would paint 17 self-portraits as he gradually stopped taking his medication, documenting his slow descent into psychosis. Each canvas grew more chaotic and fragmented, mirroring his unraveling mind. His final portrait, completed on the very day he took his own life in July of 1991, remains a chilling testament to both his mental illness and artistic talent. In 1992, 16-year-old Suzanne Capper was lured to a house in Manchester by people she thought were her friends. But for nearly a week, they tortured and humiliated her, breaking her arm, pulling out her teeth, shaving her head, and scrubbing her skin off with a wire brush before forcing her into a bathtub of disinfectant. They blasted tapes of the movie Child's Play to torment her, then drove her to a field, doused her in gasoline, and set her on fire. Suzanne survived for long enough to name her attackers before dying in the hospital 4 days later. 6 people were convicted for the heinous crimes. 4 received life sentences, including 2 women who were just 17 and 18 at the time, while the 2 remaining men were given lengthy prison terms. There's a surgery so incredibly bizarre that's called tooth and eye surgery, known medically as osteoodontokeratoprosthesis. It's a last resort operation for people with severe corneal blindness. Surgeons remove one of the patient's canine teeth, root and jawbone included, hollow it out, and fit it with a tiny plastic lens. The bizarre implant is first stitched underneath the skin of the cheek for months, where it swells, fuses with flesh, and even grows its own blood supply before it's transplanted into the blind eye. Surgeons describe the moment of implantation as one of the most surreal in medicine, sliding a blood-soaked tooth back out of the cheek and into the empty cornea. The body is far less likely to reject the implant if it's made from the patient's own living tissue, making a tooth the ideal durable anchor. The result is an unsettling image, a tooth visibly embedded in the white of the eye with a lens peeking through like a peephole. But it's restored vision to people thought to be permanently blind, sometimes after decades in darkness. These are the faces of 2 brothers who thought that murdering their family would make them famous. Morbid Facts, Part 727. In 2015, brothers Robert and Michael Bever turned their quiet Oklahoma home into a slaughterhouse. Armed with knives and body armor, the teens butchered their parents and 3 siblings in a planned midnight massacre, leaving only 2 sisters alive, one gravely wounded, the other just 2 years old and deliberately spared. Investigators later revealed the brothers weren't driven by family conflict, but by a twisted obsession with mass murder. They idolized the Columbine shooters, stockpiled weapons, and even kept journals outlining a plan to kill hundreds more once their family was out of the way, dreaming of becoming legends of infamy. The carnage only ended when the injured sister managed to call 911, bringing police to a scene so gruesome it was described as the stuff of nightmares. A couple years later, Robert was sentenced to life without parole, while Michael received life with a chance of parole after 38 years. Patrice O'Neal was a renowned stand-up comedian known for his sharp, unfiltered style on stage and appearances on Chappelle's Show, Opie and Anthony, and the Comedy Central roasts. He first discovered he had diabetes after a girlfriend told him his urine tasted like birthday cake, prompting him to get tested. The disease slowly wore him down over the years until in October of 2011, he suffered a massive stroke. Just a month later, at 41 years old, he died from complications, with his final television appearance being the roast of Charlie Sheen. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, the heat was so intense it didn't just kill people. It completely warped human remains in ways rarely seen throughout history. In Herculaneum, archaeologists discovered the body of a young man lying face down on a wooden bed whose brain had literally been turned into glass. What you're looking at in this photo is brain tissue that was flash heated to nearly 1,000 degrees before cooling so rapidly it vitrified, leaving behind a shiny glass-like substance. It remains one of the only known cases of a human brain preserved through such a gruesome transformation. After retiring from the NFL in 1990, Hall of Famer Mike Webster's life unraveled into a spiral of bizarre and disturbing behavior. Once celebrated as the Iron Man of the Pittsburgh Steelers, he spent his final years homeless or sleeping in his pickup truck, suffering crushing headaches, dementia, and paranoia. Friends and family later described shocking habits, urinating in his own oven, shocking himself with a taser just to fall asleep, and gluing his decaying teeth back together. At one point, he even carried around a briefcase filled with superglue, painkillers, and duct tape, using them as makeshift tools to hold his broken body together. By the time he died of a heart attack in 2002 at just 50 years old, Webster's decline had become a cautionary tale of the hidden costs of football. When doctors examined his brain, they discovered the first confirmed case of CTE in an NFL player, proof of how the game had slowly destroyed him from the inside out. Here's a photo of 2 tourists posing inside the Claw of Death at Chernobyl, a massive crane used to scoop up chunks of radioactive reactor core after the 1986 meltdown. The machine is still so contaminated that standing near it can deliver radiation doses dozens of times higher than a chest X-ray, and its rusted frame is coated in radioactive dust that can cling to hair, skin, or clothing. While a brief picture likely won't cause immediate sickness, the exposure adds to long-term cancer risk, and any contamination they brought home could be far deadlier. It remains one of the most dangerously toxic relics of the exclusion zone, yet people still climb inside it for a photo op. In 2000, a Tahitian man named Fidel Maruhi pulled off one of the most unlikely survivals in aviation history. He stowed away in the wheel well of a Boeing 747 bound for Los Angeles. For 7.5 hours, he endured sub-zero temperatures and near total lack of oxygen, and when rescuers found him, his core body temperature was just 79 degrees Fahrenheit, a level usually considered fatal. But against all odds, he lived, and when asked why he'd risk such a death-defying stunt, he explained his dream was to reach France simply so he could shake hands with soccer legend Zinedine Zidane. On Halloween night in 1984, 29-year-old Doreen Erbert answered her door expecting trick-or-treaters, but instead was confronted by her ex-husband, William Michael Dennis, wearing the same creepy Big Bad Wolf mask he had worn at a party the year before. Dennis had never forgiven Doreen for the accidental drowning of their 4-year-old son Paul years earlier, and had grown obsessed with the delusion that she wanted the boy dead. Armed with a machete, he forced his way inside and launched a savage frenzy of blows, striking Doreen dozens of times. She was 8 months pregnant, and the attack was so brutal that it ripped open her abdomen and literally expelled her unborn child onto the floor, the baby showing deep chop wounds and pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators later described the scene as straight out of a horror movie, with blood splattered across the entryway and the mask lying discarded nearby. Dennis was eventually sentenced to death, leaving behind a crime that remains one of the most grotesque murders ever committed on Halloween. In 1978, San Francisco was left shaken when disgruntled former city supervisor Dan White snuck into City Hall through a basement window and gunned down Mayor George Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk in cold blood. At trial, prosecutors expected an easy murder conviction, but White's lawyers argued that he was deeply depressed, pointing to drastic lifestyle changes, including a diet of sugary junk food like Twinkies, as proof of his unraveling mental state. The bizarre argument, later mocked as the Twinkie defense, convinced jurors to downgrade his charges from murder to voluntary manslaughter. White was sentenced to just over 7 years, but walked free after barely serving 5. The shocking leniency sparked outrage across San Francisco, fueling the violent White Night riots and leaving the city completely haunted by the fact that the man who assassinated both its mayor and his supervisor spent less time in prison than many would serve for petty crimes. In 2007, NASA astronaut Lisa Nowak made headlines for one of the strangest scandals in space history. Obsessed with her ex-boyfriend's new partner, Lisa drove 900 miles from Houston to Orlando in a single stretch, allegedly wearing adult diapers so she wouldn't have to stop for the bathroom. In her car, police found a BB gun, a knife, pepper spray, rubber tubing, and trash bags, tools suggesting a plan to kidnap. She ambushed Colleen Shipman in an airport parking lot, spraying her with mace before being arrested. Once a respected astronaut who had flown on the Space Shuttle Discovery, Nowak became infamous as the first NASA astronaut ever fired after the bizarre meltdown. In 2009, she managed to avoid jail time, receiving a year of probation and community service. This disturbing sign was recently put up at a cemetery in Tampa Bay. In January of 2004, Texas math teacher Alejandro Navarro checked into the ER with serious heart and kidney problems, knowing he might not make it out. But instead of resting, he pulled out his laptop and started grading papers, determined to finish his students' work even as doctors prepared him for critical care. The next day, Navarro tragically passed away, and the photo his daughter shared of him bent over his computer in the hospital went viral. She waited 63 years for the love of her life to return home. In 1950, U.S. Army Sergeant Joseph Gant went missing during the Korean War, and his wife Clara was told only that he may have been taken prisoner. Refusing to give up hope, she never remarried and kept a light burning on her porch for more than 6 decades, telling everyone she was still waiting for Joe. Finally, in 2013, his remains were identified and returned to Los Angeles in a flag-draped coffin. At 94 years old, Clara stood weeping as she welcomed him home, her lifelong vigil ending in both heartbreak and closure. This was the last photo taken of 31-year-old Londre Sylvester in July of 2021, as he walked out of Cook County Jail after posting bail, unaware it would be his final steps. Just minutes after his release, multiple gunmen leaped from 2 cars and opened fire in a calculated ambush, riddling his body with up to 64 bullets in front of stunned witnesses. Police noted Sylvester's ties to local gangs, and many believe the hit was gang-related retaliation, but with no arrests ever made, the case remains officially unsolved. In 2012, 2 13-year-old boys in Wisconsin were apparently so desperate for pizza and weed that they resorted to something horrific. They lured one boy's 78-year-old great-grandmother into her garage and brutally attacked her with a hatchet and hammer, caving in her skull and leaving her to die on the cold floor. They then rifled through her purse, walking away with just $155, blood money that hours later they blew on pizza, marijuana, and video games, laughing as if nothing happened. Investigators described the scene as one of the most disturbing they'd ever witnessed. The frail woman's body left beaten and discarded over a sum barely worth a week's allowance. Both boys were quickly arrested, showed little remorse, and were sentenced to decades in prison, ensuring the rest of their youth would be spent behind bars. In 2003, wrestling legend the Iron Sheik sat in a courtroom watching the man who had murdered his beloved daughter, Marissa. Hidden inside his mouth was a razor blade. His plan was to leap across the aisle and slit the killer's throat in front of a packed courtroom. But at the last moment, his family physically surrounded him, begging him not to throw his own life away, and he broke down in their arms. The killer was sentenced to life in prison, and in the years afterward, Sheik put down the drugs and worked hard to rebuild his life as a tribute to his daughter. On his grave in Stratford-upon-Avon, William Shakespeare left a chilling warning. "Blessed be the man who spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones." Yet in 2016, ground-penetrating radar revealed a disturbing truth. The head of his grave showed signs of tampering with a mysterious brick repair where his skull should be. The discovery gave new credence to a long-dismissed urban legend that grave robbers stole Shakespeare's skull in the late 1700s. A North Carolina man was sentenced to nearly a decade in prison after one of the most disturbing neglect cases in recent history. For 6 to 8 months, 66-year-old Bonnie Kornhaber, who was bound to a wheelchair, lay helplessly on the floor of her cluttered, hoarded home after falling from her chair. Her husband Lewis admitted he never called for help because he was embarrassed about the conditions inside, leaving her to waste away surrounded by spoiled food, trash, and insects. When Bonnie finally told him she couldn't breathe, he ignored her pleas and watched TV in another room until she was dead. By the time first responders arrived, her body was covered in sores and filth, and Lewis was later convicted of second-degree murder and neglect, sealing his downfall after nearly 40 years of marriage. This was the mask worn by 51-year-old Vance Luther Bolter when he posed as a police officer and ambushed Minnesota State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette at their Champlin home in June of 2025. Dressed in a tactical vest and carrying a flashlight, he knocked on their door in the middle of the night, and the moment Hoffman said, "You're not a cop," Bolter opened fire. Bullets tore through the couple in their doorway. John struck 9 times, Yvette 8, as their terrified daughter Hope hid just feet away while her mother shielded her body with her own. Somehow, both parents survived after hours of surgery, but they were left in critical condition. However, the carnage didn't stop there. Hours later, Bolter stormed into the home of Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman, executing she and her husband Gary as they both slept. Investigators later uncovered that he carried a disturbing hit list, targeting Democratic politicians and abortion providers, revealing the massacre as a carefully planned campaign of political terror, one that left Minnesota shaken to its core. In January of 2022, beloved comedian Bob Saget was found dead in his Orlando hotel room just hours after performing stand-up. The autopsy revealed massive skull fractures and brain bleeding, injuries more consistent with a serious car crash than a simple fall. Investigators ruled it an accident, likely from hitting his head, dismissing it as minor and going to sleep unaware of the fatal damage. Even more tragic, just that morning, Bob had posted on Instagram about the show he'd done the night before, writing, "I'm back in comedy like I was when I was 26. I guess I'm finding my new voice and loving every moment of it." With no drugs or alcohol in his system and no signs of foul play, his sudden death at 65 left fans across the world completely stunned. In February of 2023, 2 notorious orcas named Port and Starboard went on a killing spree off the coast of South Africa, slaughtering at least 17 seven-gill sharks in a single day. When the shark carcasses washed ashore, researchers were stunned to find that each had been sliced open with eerie precision. Every single liver was gone, while the rest of the body was left behind. Orcas are known to favor shark livers for their high fat content, but the surgical accuracy of these attacks has cemented their reputation as the ocean's most ruthless predators. Charlie Kirk's alleged shooter is in custody, and here's what we know so far. On September 10, 2025, conservative activist Charlie Kirk was gunned down while speaking at Utah Valley University, the fatal shot tearing through his neck from nearly 200 yards away. Police say the assassin was 22-year-old Tyler Robinson, a Utah man whose own father recognized him in surveillance photos and turned him in. Investigators found he had crept onto the roof of the Losi Center with a bolt-action rifle fitted with a scope, leaving behind eerie forensic traces like palm marks, boot prints, and imprints where his arm braced the gun. Even more disturbing were the shell casings scattered at the scene, one taunting, "Hey fascists, catch," while others were engraved with bizarre memes. Robinson also allegedly talked about retrieving a rifle from a bush, wrapping it in a towel, and engraving bullets in online Discord messages. Kirk collapsed on stage in front of a crowd of panicked students, bleeding out as security dragged him away. He died en route to the hospital, while Robinson was captured the next day and now faces faces multiple felony charges, including aggravated murder and what authorities are calling a targeted political assassination. But key questions still remain: how long Robinson planned the shooting, exactly how he obtained the rifle, and whether anyone else knew of his intentions beyond cryptic online posts. Officials say he acted alone, yet his mix of political slogans, meme-like engravings, and anti-fascist references leave investigators and the public still searching for a clear motive beyond his political anger toward Charlie Kirk. In October of 2015, 21-year-old Dutch medical student Sophia Koetsier vanished while on a Ugandan safari after stepping away for a bathroom break just a short distance from her lodge. About 3 weeks after she disappeared, searchers found her belongings in eerie condition. Her purse and one shoe neatly placed on the ground, while the other shoe was never recovered, scraps of her fabric tied to branches like trail markers, and her underwear bizarrely hanging 15 feet high in a tree. No blood, remains, or sign of a struggle were ever found, as authorities quickly wrote it off as a wild animal attack, though experts noted that predators don't hang underwear in trees or arrange items so deliberately. Her mother has spent years fighting the official explanation, describing how it felt like the earth had simply swallowed her up, since not even a single fragment of a bone has ever been recovered. Nearly a decade later, Sophia's disappearance remains one of Africa's most haunting safari mysteries.